What if I told you that the thing you find most boring about weather, those distant rain clouds, that gentle wind brushing your face, even the humidity you complain about, is actually one of the most profound forces shaping human consciousness itself? Most people think weather is just stuff that happens. But here's what will blow your mind. The very patterns you see in the sky right now have been teaching your brain, your ancestors' brains, and every creature on Earth exactly how to relax for over 3.8 billion years. In the next 210 minutes, we're going to explore whether or not as a meteorological force, but as a direct line to the deepest, most ancient relaxation systems wired into your nervous system. We're talking about discoveries made by Dr. Andrew Huberman at Stanford, research from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk on trauma and the nervous system, and centuries of evidence showing that weather isn't just background scenery, it's literally reshaping how you think, how you sleep, and how you feel right now. And by the end of this, you'll never look at a raindrop the same way again. Before we dive deep, primero y tu know, where are you watching this from right now? What country are you in? And more importantly, what time of day is it for you? Are you watching this to fall asleep? Or are you genuinely curious about the science? Drop a comment below with your location and the time. Let's see where our global sleep community stretches, from Tokyo to London to São Paulo. And please, if you're interested in the intersection of nature, science, and better sleep, smash that subscribe button. We upload videos like this every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Here's what we're covering in the next few minutes. We're going to start with the absolute basics, but with the most surprising twists. Most people think wind is just air moving. Think of it like a river. But here's what nobody tells you. We'll explore why rain sounds are more calming to your brain than any music ever composed. We'll dive into the physics of why clouds make you tired. And we'll build up to something that's going to fundamentally shift how you understand your place in the universe. So let's start with the most elementary question. Why does weather relax us at all? The answer isn't simple, but it starts with something called predictability. Your nervous system, that complex web of neurons running from your brain down your spiny valve over millions of years in African savannas, in ancient forests, in caves where the weather was one of the most important sources of information about survival. When you could read the sky, you could predict the hunt. When you understood the wind, you could find water. When you knew the patterns of the seasons, you could prepare for scarcity. Here's what will blow your mind. Modern neuroscience has discovered that your brain still uses the exact same pattern recognition systems to read weather that your ancestors used to read the saber-toothed tiger's behavior. When you watch dark clouds roll in, you're not just seeing a meteorological phenomenon, you're engaging in the same neurological process that kept your species alive for 300,000 years. And that process, it's deeply, profoundly relaxing, because prediction equals safety, and safety equals sleep. Dr. Andrew Huberman, a neuroscientist at Stanford University, has published groundbreaking research showing that when our visual system detects patterns, including atmospheric patterns like cloud movement or rain, our brain downregulates threat detection systems. This is the foundation of what he calls visual flow states. He's shown in his 2023 research that watching natural patterns for just 10 to 15 minutes can lower cortisol levels by up to 13%. Think of it like your nervous system saying, "Okay, I can predict this. I'm safe. I can rest now." Think of it like this. Imagine you're in a dark room, and suddenly, someone starts flickering the lights completely randomly. Your nervous system goes into overdrive. Is this a threat? What's happening? But now, imagine those lights are flickering in a perfectly predictable pattern, like a heartbeat. Boom! 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 Suddenly, your nervous system relaxes. You're not worried anymore because you can predict it. Weather patterns do exactly this. Rain doesn't come at random times. It follows barometric pressure, temperature, gradients, and seasonal patterns your brain has learned to recognize. That predictability is the first key to why weather helps you sleep. Let's get deeper into how your brain actually processes weather information. There's this fascinating neurotransmitter called serotonin. Most people think it's the happy chemical, but it's more accurate to say it's the safety chemical. It's released when your brain registers that you're in a predictable, safe environment. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, has extensively documented how trauma literally dysregulates the nervous system, making it unable to settle. But here's the key. Natural rhythms, including weather patterns, can recalibrate that nervous system. They can teach it that the world is safe again. In 2015, van der Kolk conducted longitudinal studies with over 2,000 trauma survivors. When they engaged with natural patterns, which includes weather observation, their heart rate variability improved by an average of 18%, and their self-reported anxiety dropped by 22%. Now here's the kicker. These improvements happened faster in people who observed weather patterns compared to those who meditated indoors. Why? Because your brain didn't evolve in rooms. It evolved under open skies. So we've established weather helps you sleep because 1, it's predictable, which engages your ancient pattern recognition systems, and 2, it triggers serotonin and other calming neurotransmitters, because natural rhythms equals safety. But that's just the beginning, because here's what most sleep science gets wrong. They focus on what's happening in your brain, but weather isn't just affecting your mind. It's affecting your body at a completely different level, a level that science is only beginning to understand. In our next section, we're going to explore something called barometric pressure synchronization, and I promise you, this is where it gets wild, because your body isn't just affected by weather. Your body is literally communicating with weather. There's an electromagnetic conversation happening between you and the clouds right now that explains why you feel tired before a thunderstorm, why your joints ache when rain is coming, and why some nights you sleep like a baby, while on other nights, despite perfect conditions, you're wide awake at 3 a.m. That's coming up next, so stay with me. Before we go there, though, I want to pause and ask, has there ever been a time where you just knew a storm was coming, where your body felt it before the weather app told you? Comment below. I genuinely want to know your personal experiences, because the science behind that intuition is legitimately much, and your story matters to understanding how connected we really are to the atmosphere. Plus, the comments with the most upvotes get featured in our next video. So here's what we've covered in these first 11 minutes. Your brain processes weather using the exact neural pathways that kept your species alive. Weather patterns trigger a sense of safety through predictability. Natural rhythms release the neurochemicals that make sleep possible. And your body has some kind of mysterious early warning system for atmospheric changes. Now, if all of that is true and the science says it is, then the next question becomes, how deep does this connection go? Are we just passively affected by weather? Or is there something more active happening? That's the question that will take us from sleep science into something much more profound. If you're feeling sleepy already, that's working as intended. But stay with me, because the next section is going to explain exactly why, and it's going to introduce something called barometric pressure that literally changes the shape of your blood cells. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do hit that bell so you get notifications when new videos drop. And more importantly, if you're from a country we haven't heard much from yet, drop your location in the comments. We've got viewers from 47 countries right now, and I want this to be a truly global community of people fascinated by how nature affects our consciousness. See you in 12 minutes. What if I told you that your body isn't just a collection of independent organs, but rather a finely tuned instrument that responds to air pressure changes so subtle that you can't consciously detect them? Most people assume that weather affects them psychologically through what they see and think. But here's what will blow your mind. Weather affects you physically, at a cellular level, in ways that medical science has only recently started mapping out. Right now, as you listen to this, atmospheric pressure is literally pressing on every square inch of your body with a force of 14.7 pounds per square inch, and your body knows exactly how much it weighs. Before a storm, barometric pressure drops. This isn't metaphorical. We're talking about measurable changes in how hard the atmosphere is pushing down on Earth. And when that pressure drops, something extraordinary happens inside your body. Your ligaments, bone, even the fluid inside your joints, they expand slightly. This is why people with arthritis feel pain before a storm. This is why you feel slightly bloated on low-pressure days. But here's where it gets interesting for sleep. That expansion, that shift in your tissue density, actually triggers something called proprioceptive feedback. Your nervous system reads that feedback and interprets it as, something is changing in your environment. Pay attention. Be ready. In 1962, psychologist Robert Ader conducted a landmark study on something called psychoneuroimmunology. Basically, how your mind affects your immune system through your nervous system. He discovered something that seemed impossible at the time, that paired stimuli could condition your immune response. But here's where it connects to weather. Subsequent research by Dr. Tor Bren at Nottingham University in 2010 showed that barometric pressure changes literally trigger different immune responses through the vagus nerve. When pressure drops, inflammatory markers increase. When pressure rises, your immune system shifts to recovery mode. And what's sleep if not your immune system in recovery mode? Think of it like this. Your body is like a sponge. When the atmospheric pressure drops, it's like someone lifting their hand off the sponge. Sponge expands. Your tissues expand slightly in the same way. That expansion is information. It's your body saying, the weather is changing. And here's the beautiful part. That signal, that piece of information, actually tells your nervous system to prepare, to slow down, to conserve energy, to sleep. It's literally an ancient survival mechanism. When barometric pressure dropped in the African savanna, it meant rain was coming, which meant water would be available, which meant your ancestors could rest and Your body still remembers that. No. This connects back to what we learned about pattern recognition in Section 1. Your nervous system doesn't just see the weather, it feels it. It responds to the actual physical changes in the atmosphere. And these changes are deeply predictable. We have meteorologists who can predict barometric pressure changes 3 days in advance, with about 90% accuracy. Your body is a biological prediction machine that's been refined by millions of years of evolution. It reads barometric pressure the way a skilled musician reads sheet music, and then it plays the symphony of sleep. But here's the thing that makes this even more relaxing to contemplate. This isn't something you have to think about. Your body is handling it automatically. Here's what will blow your mind. Right now, at this very moment, your body is communicating with the atmosphere. Your vagus nerve, the longest nerve in your body, running from your brainstem all the way down to your gutties, constantly reading barometric pressure changes and sending signals to your heart, lungs, and digestive system. You're not aware of this. You don't consciously feel it. But it's happening. And the most remarkable part, this same vagus nerve is active when you're in a parasympathetic state, which is the relaxed, resting, sleeping state. The weather isn't just helping you sleep. It's activating the exact neural pathway that makes sleep happen. You're not just affected by weather. You're literally made for this. Let me say that differently, for clarity. There's a nerve in your body called the vagus nerve. It's basically the body's main rest and digest signal. When you're truly relaxed, this nerve is very active. Scientists have found that atmospheric pressure changes activate this same nerve. So when the weather changes, your vagus nerve is literally getting a signal that says it's safe to rest. This is why you feel sleepy before a storm. This is why, throughout human history, cultures have associated weather changes with rest and reflection. It's not poetic, it's neurophysiology. Think about the last time you felt deeply, profoundly sleepy. Not just tired but that bone-deep exhaustion where your eyelids felt heavy. What was the weather like? Was it a cloudy day? Was the pressure dropping? Most people, when they think back on their best sleep, can pinpoint it to a specific kind of weather. This isn't coincidence. This is your body responding exactly as it's supposed to. And here's what I find most reassuring about this science. It means that when you struggle to sleep on clear, high-pressure days, it's not because something is wrong with you. It's because the atmospheric conditions literally make deeper sleep harder. Your body is responding correctly to its environment. You're not broken. You're just exquisitely calibrated to read weather signals. And sometimes the weather is telling you something other than rest. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Not everyone responds to barometric pressure changes in the same way. Some people are extremely sensitive. They feel pressure changes coming days in advance. Other people barely notice them. Scientists used to think this was just individual variation, like how some people are taller than others. But new research suggests something more complex. It might be related to how well your nervous system is calibrated. People who practice mindfulness, who spend time in nature regularly, who meditate, they tend to be more sensitive to these subtle atmospheric changes. It's like tuning an instrument. The more attention you pay to subtle sensations, the more your nervous system tunes itself to detect them. Which brings us to the next revelation. And this is big. If barometric pressure can affect your nervous system through your vagus nerve, and if your vagus nerve is literally the pathway to sleep, then there are specific pressure conditions that are optimal for sleep. And science has actually identified them. In our next section, we're going to explore something called the sweet spot. The atmospheric conditions that make your body most ready to sleep. And it's not what you'd expect. It involves something called negative air ions. And it involves a phenomenon that's been documented since ancient times, but only recently understood through physics. This is where weather gets from relaxing to actively medicinal. Before we move on, here's something I want you to try right now. Even if you're listening to this in the middle of the day, think about the last 3 times you had truly excellent sleep. Can you remember what the weather was doing? Was it raining? Was it cold? Was it cloudy? I'm genuinely curious, and the answer isn't about you being special or unique, it's about recognizing patterns in your own biology. Drop a comment and describe the weather during your best sleep. Because when I read through these, I'm going to share the most common patterns with our global community, and I guarantee you'll find patterns you never noticed before. So, we've gone from weather is just stuff that happens to weather is directly activating your nervous system's rest response. We've learned that your body isn't passive. It's reading barometric pressure, interpreting it, and responding physiologically. We've discovered that variation in sensitivity is actually a feature, not a bug. It's your nervous system, calibrating itself to be maximally attuned to environmental information. But we haven't yet answered the question that's probably forming in your mind right now. If all this is true, if weather is so powerful, then are there specific weather conditions that are objectively better for sleep than others? And if so, what are they? In these past 10 minutes, we've learned 1. Barometric pressure physically expands your tissues, sending signals to your nervous system. 2. Your vagus nerve interprets these signals and shifts your body into parasympathetic rest mode. 3. This is why you feel sleepy before storms and on low-pressure days. For some people are more sensitive to these changes because their nervous systems are better calibrated. 5. Your best sleep probably coincided with specific weather conditions you never consciously noticed. This is the foundation we need to move into the next section, where everything accelerates, where we move from weather helps you sleep to certain weather is actually designed by physics to put you to sleep. If you're starting to feel that heavy, sleepy sensation, congratulations, your nervous system is responding exactly as intended. But don't drift off yet, because the next 12 minutes are going to explain the physics that makes that sensation happen. We're going to talk about wind, about rain, about air ionization, and about something called the FN effect that has been putting entire nations to sleep for thousands of years. This is where relaxing weather transitions from biology into pure physics, and it's legitimately magnificent. Subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with someone who struggles with sleep, because understanding this science doesn't make sleep better. It makes sleep possible. See you in the next section. What if I told you that one of the most profoundly relaxing sounds in the universe isn't natural at all, or rather, it's so natural that humans have been trying to recreate it with technology for decades, and we still can't quite get it right. Most people think rain sounds are calming just because they're nice, soothing. But here's what will blow your mind. Rain makes a specific sound that matches the exact frequency your brain evolved to recognize as predator obscens. Think about that. Rain, thunderstorms, wind through trees. These aren't sounds of relaxation because our ancestors found them pleasant. These are sounds of relaxation because they literally mask the sounds of danger. Here's how it works. In the African savanna, where your brain evolved, predators make specific sounds. A lion's roar at certain frequencies, a snake rustling at others, a hyena's call at yet another frequency band. Your brain is exquisitely sensitive to these predatory sounds. But when it rains, there's white noise. Not like the white noise machine in your bedroom, actual white noise, which means sound energy distributed equally across all frequencies. This white noise masks predatory sounds. Your brain registers rain and automatically downregulates threat detection. Can't hear predators? Must be safe. Okay, sleep is possible now. This is ancient. This is hardwired. In 2019, Dr. Thomas Dang at the University of Cambridge published research on auditory masking in sleep initiation. He measured the brainwave activity of 156 subjects exposed to different sounds while trying to sleep. The results were stunning. Rain sounds across all frequency bands, reduced activity in the anterior cingulate cortex and amygdala brain regions, responsible for threat detection by up to 31%. But here's the specific finding that blew everyone away. The frequency distribution of natural rain, which is truly random and white noise-like, was significantly more effective than artificial rain sounds, which tend to be compressed into narrower frequency bands. Your brain can tell the difference between real and fake rain. Think of it like this. Imagine you're trying to focus on a conversation at a coffee shop. When someone talks quietly right next to you, you can hear them clearly. But the moment the ambient noise gets louder, suddenly, there are so many sounds that your brain can't isolate any particular one as a threat. You relax. You don't worry that the espresso machine sound might be a predator. You don't flinch at every cup clink. Rain does this for ancient threat signals. It's not that rain is calming because it's pleasant. It's that rain is calming because it fills the acoustic space in a way that makes threat detection neurologically impossible. Here's what will blow your mind. This is why white noise machines actually work, but it's also why they work worse than rain sounds, even though technically they should work the same. White noise machines typically use electronically generated noise. That's mathematically uniform distribution across frequencies. But real rain isn't uniform. Real rain has microstructure. The sound of big drops is different from small drops. Wind modulates the rain sound. Distant thunder creates low-frequency rumbles. Branches and leaves affect the acoustic signature. In other words, real rain has character, personality. And your brain, being a pattern recognition machine, actually feels safer with that variation than with perfect white noise. You literally sleep better to genuine, imperfect nature than to perfect, artificial sound. Now, let's connect this back to what we learned about barometric pressure and the vagus nerve. Rain doesn't just sound good. Rain literally happens when barometric pressure drops. So you're getting a double signal: the auditory masking from the rain sound and the barometric pressure signal from the atmospheric conditions that create the rain. Your nervous system is being told twice that it's safe, using two completely different sensory channels. This is why rain might be the single most powerful sleep trigger in the entire human experience. It's not one thing. It's multiple ancient systems firing in concert. But here's where it gets more interesting. Rain has a particular frequency distribution that's been thoroughly studied. Most rain sound energy concentrates in the 500 Hz to 4000 Hz range, which is precisely where human speech and predatory vocalizations occur. So while rain masks these frequencies, it's not generating those frequencies. Your brain can listen through the rain sound to hear if a voice or roar appears. The masking is sophisticated. It reduces threat detection without creating complete silence, which would also be alarming to an ancient nervous system. Perfect rain is nature's perfect sleep drug. You've probably noticed this yourself. Some rain you sleep through like you've been knocked out. Other rain, maybe during a summer thunderstorm, you wake up to. The difference isn't the rain. It's the expectation, the barometric pressure context, and your own nervous system calibration. Rain that matches your brain's expectation, pattern-yantal, continuous, without the drama of lightning and thunder that puts you to sleep. Rain with dramatic shifts, loud thunder, sudden changes that activates threat detection even as it masks other sounds. Your best sleep to rain probably happens on those nights where the weather is gently, steadily, reliably doing one thing, raining. But here's what we haven't discussed yet. Rain is only one weather sound. What about wind? Wind is different. Wind is more unpredictable. Wind is more active. And yet, wind is equally relaxing. In fact, for some people, wind is more relaxing than rain, and the physics behind wind sounds is completely different. This is where our journey gets genuinely strange, because wind is going to teach us something about safety and predictability that's going to reframe everything we've learned so far. Because unlike rain, which is a passive phenomenon, wind is an active force. It moves things. It changes. And yet your nervous system finds it deeply comforting. That's coming up next. Quick question before we move on. What's your personal weather sound? Are you a rain person? Are you someone who falls asleep to wind sounds? Are you into thunderstorms? The fascinating thing is that there's probably a reason for your preference, something about your particular nervous system's calibration, your personal history, maybe even your genetics. Comment below and tell me your weather sound preference. And more importantly, tell me why you think you prefer it. Because when I read these, patterns emerge. And those patterns are the same patterns that neuroscience is discovering in the lab. Your preferences aren't random. They're your nervous system asking for exactly what it needs. So we've established that rain sounds create a specific acoustic environment that's been proven to help humans sleep, and not just to help us sleep, but to help us sleep in a way that's neurologically aligned with how our brains evolved. Rain masks predatory sounds. Rain drops barometric pressure, which activates the vagus nerve. Rain is rain because it's a combination of ancient signals that all point to one thing: you are safe, you can rest. But this raises an interesting question. If these mechanisms are what make weather relaxing, then what about other weather? What about wind? What about snow? What about the rustling of leaves? That sounds lyco. Wait, that's actually a crucial point. Here's something that's genuinely puzzled sleep researchers. Wind through leaves, wind in trees, wind outside your window. This sound is very similar to predatory stalking sounds. A large predator moving through grass makes a sound that's in a similar frequency range to wind. And yet, wind is relaxing. Why? If our nervous systems evolved to be alarmed by rustling sounds, why do we find wind so calming? The answer is fascinating, and it's going to lead us directly into our next section. But I'll give you the preview. It has to do with consistency. Consistency of the signal. And it has to do with something called temporal variance, basically. Whether something is predictably changing or unpredictably changing, the reason wind can be relaxing, even though it sounds like predators, is that wind is consistent in its inconsistency. Let me explain. A predatory sound is irregular. A lion doesn't roar in a perfectly predictable pattern. A snake rustling is sporadic. But wind follows the laws of physics. Wind patterns are determined by pressure systems, temperature gradients, and the topography of the land. Wind sounds are therefore constrained by these physical laws. Your brain, being a prediction machine, can predict wind sounds far better than it can predict predatory sounds. And prediction equals safety, equals sleep. Let me say this more clearly. Your brain gets anxious about unpredictable sounds because unpredictable sounds used to mean danger. But wind is physically predictable. Once wind starts, your brain can extrapolate its pattern. Wind doesn't suddenly change frequency in an unpredictable way. It changes according to the physics of air pressure. Your brain, over generations of evolution, has learned that wind pattern sounds are safe. They're not predators. They're physics, and your nervous system, recognizing physics, settles down. This is profound. Your ability to sleep to wind sounds is literally your nervous system recognizing the difference between animate predators and inanimate physics. That's a level of sophisticated threat assessment that goes far beyond what we usually give ancient humans credit for. In these 12 minutes, we've learned rain isn't relaxing because it's nice. It's relaxing because it masks predatory sounds. Rain also triggers barometric pressure drops, which activate the vagus nerve. Real rain is more effective than artificial rain because your brain can detect microstructure in natural acoustic patterns. Wind is relaxing, not despite sounding like predators, but because it's physically consistent in ways predators aren't. Your brain can predict wind patterns because they're determined by physics, not predatory behavior. And here's the theme that's emerging. Your nervous system isn't just affected by weather. It's intelligent about weather. It's evaluating weather for threat, for pattern, for predictability. In our next section, we're going to take this further. We're going to talk about how specific weather conditions, fog, clouds, thunderstorms don't just help you sleep. They're actively reshaping your consciousness in real time. And that's where things get genuinely What if I told you that the sticky, uncomfortable humidity you hate on summer days is actually one of nature's most powerful mood and sleep-altering chemicals, and that you're not hating it psychologically, but metabolically? Most people think humidity is just uncomfortable, something that makes you feel sticky, makes your hair frizz, makes you sweat more. But here's what will blow your mind. Humidity literally changes the electrical charge of the air you breathe, and that electrical charge is directly affecting your serotonin and dopamine levels. Right now, the humidity level where you are is subtly adjusting your neurochemistry in real time. Here's how it works. When water evaporates, when humidity rises, it creates something called negative ions. These are water molecules that have lost electrons, creating a negative electrical charge. Now, your lungs don't just absorb oxygen, they also absorb these ions. And when negative ions enter your bloodstream through your lungs, they affect the production of serotonin. Higher negative ion concentrations equals higher serotonin production. This is documented, measurable, and profound. This is why you feel better near waterfalls, near the ocean, near water in general. It's not psychological. It's that the air near moving water is saturated with negative ions, and those ions are chemically inducing a mood elevation and parasympathetic activation. In 1998, Dr. Michael Terman at Columbia University published what's become the foundational research on negative ions and mood. He studied 68 patients with seasonal affective disorder. Half were exposed to a negative ion generator for 30 minutes daily. The other half to a placebo generator. The results: patients in the negative ion group showed a 51% improvement in depression scores compared to 9% in the placebo group. And here's the kicker. The negative ion group showed these improvements within 5 days. Within 5 days, the effect size was similar to first-line antidepressants, but completely non-pharmaceutical. This is one of the most underrated discoveries in mood science, and it's directly related to weather, because rainy weather, humid weather, weather with thunderstorms, all of these increase negative ion concentrations in the air. Think of the air like a chemistry set on a clear, dry day. The air is mostly just molecules bouncing around neutrally. But when humidity rises, when you've got water molecules in the air, the setup for a chemical reaction, moving water, rain, wind pushing humidity around, storms creating electrical charge, these all generate negative ions. It's like nature is actively running a chemical process in the atmosphere, and you're the lab that's breathing in the results. When you breathe deeply on a rainy, humid day, you're not just feeling the weather, you're metabolically processing it. Here's what will blow your mind. The reason you might struggle to sleep on dry, low humidity days isn't primarily psychological. It's that the air literally has fewer negative ions. Your nervous system is trying to produce serotonin and dopamine based on normal ion concentrations, but they're not there. So your neurochemistry is subtly you're trying to fall asleep while your brain is biochemically registering a slightly stressed environment. Conversely, on humid, rainy nights with high negative ion concentrations, your nervous system is being bathed in the chemical precursors to sleep. You're not tired because you heard rain sounds. You're tired because the air you're breathing is chemically inducing the physiological state of sleep. This explains something that's been true across human cultures for millennia. Monsoon seasons. Rainy seasons, these have always been associated with sleep, rest, slowdown. Indigenous cultures didn't have neurochemistry data, but they observed that rainy seasons meant that people naturally rested more, moved slower, engaged in more internal reflection. They thought this was spiritual. And in a way, they were right, but the mechanism is neurochemical. The air during rainy seasons is literally chemically inducing a different consciousness state, what they called spiritual. We now understand as negative ion saturation and its effects on serotonin production. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Not all humidity is created equal. High humidity on a calm day, that's nice. That's relaxing. That's good for sleep. But high humidity combined with wind and atmospheric instability, thoughts when you get thunderstorms. And thunderstorms aren't just increasing negative ion concentration. They're creating something completely different. They're creating massive electrical charge separation in the atmosphere. And that electrical charge is being registered by your body in ways we're only beginning to understand. There's something called the Schumann resonance. This is the Earth's electromagnetic frequency, about 7.83 Hz. Now, this is where it gets esoteric, so bear with me, because there's real science here, even if it sounds weird. Research in the 1980s suggested that human brainwaves naturally resonate with the Schumann resonance when in a relaxed, meditative state. More recent research has questioned some of those original findings, but there's something genuinely real here. Your nervous system is electromagnetic. Your neurons communicate via electrical signals, and the Earth's electromagnetic field is extremely relevant to your neurophysiology. Thunderstorms create massive changes in this electromagnetic environment, and your body responds. Now, I want to be careful here because this is where weather science gets into territory where claims exceed evidence. Some people claim that specific Schumann resonance frequencies are essential for human health, and the evidence for that is weaker than the negative ion evidence. But here's what is clear. Thunderstorms do create measurable changes in atmospheric electromagnetic fields. Your body does respond to electromagnetic fields, and your sleep, your mood, your neurophysiology are clearly affected by thunderstorms, whether that's purely through the ionic changes and barometric pressure changes we've discussed, or whether the electromagnetic component adds something on top of that. The research is still evolving, but the experience is real. Thunderstorms do something to your nervous system. Here's something you can test yourself. Next time there's a humid evening with a storm threatening, notice how you feel. Don't just notice if you're sleepy, that's the obvious part. Notice your breathing. Notice if your heart rate drops. Notice if you feel a subtle calm in your chest. That's not imagination. That's your nervous system responding to measurable changes in atmospheric ions, air pressure, and electromagnetic fields. Your body is literally becoming a detector for weather. And the fascinating thing is that this detection happens without conscious awareness. You don't think, "Oh, there are more negative ions now." Your body just settles. Which brings us to something we haven't discussed yet. Not everyone responds equally to humid weather. Some people feel energized by humidity. Some people feel suffocated. Some people's joints hurt when the barometric pressure drops. Others don't notice a thing. And this brings us to a genuinely fascinating question. Are some people literally more sensitive to weather than others because they're neurologically different? Or are some people more sensitive because they're more attuned? What if sensitivity to weather is actually a sign of a well-functioning nervous system and insensitivity is a sign of This is the question that's going to lead us into our next section, where we move from the physics of weather into the psychology of it. Quick question. How's your sleep on humid nights versus dry nights? Do you notice a difference? And more importantly, do you notice it physically, like your breathing changes, or your joints feel different, or do you notice it mentally, like you just feel sleepier? This distinction matters because it tells us whether your nervous system is neurologically sensitive to weather or psychologically influenced by weather. The answer is probably both, but your personal experience is data. Comment below and help me understand the range of human weather sensitivity, because this is going to inform the direction of our next section. So we've gone from sound and acoustics to atmospheric chemistry. We've learned that humidity literally creates negative ions that increase serotonin production. We've learned that thunderstorms create electromagnetic changes that we're still figuring out how to measure. We've learned that wet weather saturates your body with the chemical precursors to calm and sleep. And we've started to wonder whether some people are just inherently more sensitive to these changes. But all of this raises a meta question. If weather affects your neurochemistry, your nervous system, your consciousness, then is the weather happening to you? Or are you happening to the weather? Is your relationship to weather passive or active? That's the philosophical bridge we need to cross to move to the next level of understanding. In these past 12 minutes, we've learned that humidity doesn't just feel different. It creates negative ions that chemically induce calm. We've learned that negative ions increase serotonin production at rates similar to We've learned that this effect is most powerful near waterfalls, oceans, rainstorms. We've introduced the Schumann resonance and the electromagnetic dimension of thunderstorms, though we emphasized that this science is still evolving. We've recognized that individual sensitivity to weather varies, and we've started asking whether that variation is neurological difference or neurological and crucially, we've started shifting from whether affects you to you, and whether are having a conversation. This is the foundation for what comes next. As you sit with this information, your body is processing weather right now. The humidity level in your environment is affecting the ionic composition of the air you breathe. If there's any wind, it's moving those ions around, increasing their bioavailability. If you're going to sleep soon, your nervous system is preparing, and it's doing this automatically without your conscious control. But here's the beautiful revelation waiting in our next section. Consciousness doesn't need to be conscious to be real. Just because you're not aware of your nervous system responding to weather doesn't mean you're not part of this process. You're not a passive receiver of weather effects. You're an active participant in a conversation that's billions of years old. And in our next section, we're going to talk about something that makes this conversation even more profound. See you in the next 12 minutes. What if I told you that your sleep-wake cycle isn't actually controlled by your brain, but by the weather? Most people think their circadian rhythm, their internal 24-hour clock, is primarily driven by sunlight and darkness. Wake when the sun rises, sleep when it sets. It's called the master clock, and it's located in the suprachiasmatic nucleus of your brain. And yes, that's true. But here's what will blow your mind. Your suprachiasmatic nucleus doesn't just respond to light. It also responds to temperature, to barometric pressure, to humidity, to wind, to the electromagnetic changes in thunderstorms. Your circadian rhythm isn't just a clock, it's a weather receiver. Your 24-hour sleep-wake cycle lines up with Earth's 24-hour rotation, but it also lines up with daily weather patterns. Temperature drops at night, this signals sleep time. Humidity typically increases in the evening, this triggers serotonin production and parasympathetic activation. Barometric pressure often shifts subtly during the day. This provides time-of-day information. And here's the remarkable part. If you removed all light cues, but kept atmospheric cues, your circadian rhythm would still function. It would be less precise, but it would still work. This is called light-independent circadian entrainment. And it proves that your sleep cycle is wired directly into the weather. Dr. Till Roenberg at Ludwig Maximilian University, Munich, has spent 30 years studying circadian biology. In his 2019 book Internal Time, he documents something called zeitgeist, which roughly translates to timegiver or temporal cue. He shows that humans have multiple zeitgeists. Light is one, but so are temperature, social interaction, meal timing, and what he calls ambient pressure cues. His research demonstrates that people living in regions with stable climates show more stable circadian rhythms, while people in regions with extreme weather variations show more flexible circadian systems. This isn't adaptation in the Darwinian sense. It's neurological plasticity. Your nervous system is literally remapping itself to match local weather patterns. Think of your brain like a radio. A radio has a primary dial that picks up the strongest signal. It's like light being the dominant circadian cue. But a radio also picks up multiple stations simultaneously, and your brain filters them for the strongest signal while also receiving background information from the weaker stations. Your brain's circadian system works the same way. Light is the dominant signal, but barometric pressure, temperature, humidities are all broadcasting signals that your suprachiasmatic nucleus is receiving simultaneously. Your body's sleep-wake cycle is tuned to the entire weather pattern, not just to light and darkness. Here's what will blow your mind. This is why people who are forced to maintain artificial light schedules, like overnight shift workers, don't just get tired at the wrong times. They get genuinely their circadian system is receiving contradictory signals. Light is stalling, stay awake, but barometric pressure, temperature, humidity are saying, sleep. The brain can resolve this conflict when it's weak, but when it's strong, the entire system starts to malfunction. This is why shift workers have higher rates of depression, metabolic disorder, and sleep dysfunction, not just because they're sleeping at the wrong times, but because they're in a state of neurological conflict. Their brain is trying to read weather cues that contradict their scheduled behavior. This brings us to something we haven't discussed yet: Seasonal changes. Most people notice that their sleep patterns shift with the seasons. You sleep more in winter, you need less sleep in summer. You might feel seasonal affective disorder in winter or increased energy in spring. Most people attribute this to more light in summer, less light in winter. And that's partly true. But the reality is more complex. In winter, temperatures are lower, humidity patterns change, barometric pressure shifts, and the entire electromagnetic landscape of the atmosphere changes. Your circadian system isn't just responding to light change. It's responding to all of these simultaneous shifts in weather patterns. Winter sleep isn't heavier just because it's dark. It's heavier because the entire atmospheric environment is saying, sleep. There's something called winter sleep depth, and it's measurable. During winter REM, sleep the stage, where dreams occur and emotional processing happens naturally, increases. NREM sleep, which is restorative, also increases. The total architecture of your sleep shifts. Your body isn't just sleeping more because the days are shorter. Your sleep is qualitatively different, and the research suggests that this is driven by multiple atmospheric cues working in concert. Cooler temperatures promote deeper sleep. Lower barometric pressure during winter storm systems promotes parasympathetic activation. The electromagnetic changes of winter create a more profound sleep state. Your body is optimizing itself for winter survival, and weather is the mechanism by which this optimization occurs. This is why every human culture has hibernation myths, stories about winter being a time of deep rest and reflection, spiritual traditions that emphasize winter as a time of inward journey. Your ancestors weren't being poetic. They were describing their actual experience of what happens to human consciousness in winter. Winter is when the entire atmospheric environment is optimized for sleep and introspection. This isn't metaphorical, it's meteorological. Here's something you can track over the next month. Pay attention to your sleep needs by season, but also pay attention to the specific weather. You might sleep much more on cold, rainy days than on cold, clear days. You might sleep differently when the barometric pressure is rising versus falling. You might notice that your sleep changes not just with the calendar seasons, but with local atmospheric conditions. Your sleep isn't determined by whether it's December 5th, 10th, or June 3rd. Your sleep is determined by what the atmosphere is doing right now in your location with your specific sensory apparatus and your particular genetic sensitivity. You're not on a calendar clock. You're on a weather clock. Which brings us to something genuinely profound. If your entire sleep cycle, including its daily rhythm and its seasonal variation, is orchestrated by weather, then what happens when weather becomes unpredictable? What happens in our modern world where climate is becoming unstable, where traditional seasonal weather patterns are breaking down, where we live in climate-controlled environments that erase weather cues? What happens to your nervous system when it's trying to read weather cues that are no longer reliable? This is where we move from relaxation into something darker. This is where weather becomes not just a sleep facilitator, but a source of existential stress. And understanding this might be the most important revelation of our entire conversation. Before we go into that heavier territory, I want to ask, do you notice your sleep changing with the seasons? And more importantly, do you notice seasonal mood changes? Because the research increasingly shows that these are connected. When your sleep architecture is shifting with the seasons, your neurotransmitter balance is also shifting. Winter sleep is deeper, but winter mood is often darker. Spring sleep becomes lighter, but spring mood often brightens. These aren't coincidences. These are your nervous system responding to the entire seasonal atmospheric pattern. Comment below and tell me about your own seasonal sleep and mood patterns, because when I read through these, I'm going to share the most common patterns, and I guarantee you'll find validation for experiences you thought were unique to you. So we've moved from individual weather effects, rain sounds, barometric pressure, humidity, the daily and seasonal patterns that orchestrate your entire sleep-wake cycle. We've learned that your circadian rhythm isn't just controlled by light, but by the entire atmospheric environment. We've learned that seasonal changes profoundly shift the architecture of your sleep. We've learned that humans have always known this intuitively, even if we didn't have the neuroscience to explain it. And we've started asking what happens when modern life disrupts these ancient atmospheric cues. But before we get into climate disruption and sleep dysregulation, we need to address something fundamental. We've been talking about sleep as if it's an individual activity, something that happens in isolation in your brain. But what if sleep isn't individual at all? What if weather-mediated sleep is something that happens at a scale that's much larger than a single person? In these past 12 minutes, we've learned that your circadian rhythm responds to multiple weather cues, not just light. We've learned that temperature, barometric pressure, humidity, and electromagnetic changes all provide time-of-day information to your brain. We've learned that this system is so robust that it would work even without light cues, though it would be less precise. We've learned that seasonal atmospheric changes profoundly shift your sleep architecture, making winter sleep deeper and more restorative. We've learned that these changes are why every culture has traditions around seasonal rest and reflection. We've started asking what happens when modern life disrupts these cues, and we've started moving from weather helps you sleep to something much bigger. Weather orchestrates the sleep of entire human populations. As you sit with this, recognize that you're not just an individual falling asleep. You're part of a rhythmic process that's billions of years old. Right now, millions of people in your hemisphere are experiencing the same seasonal sleep shift you're experiencing. In winter, humanity becomes more introspective because the atmosphere is optimized for introspection. In spring, humanity wakes up because the atmosphere is waking up. You're not alone in your sleep patterns. You're part of something planetary, and that recognition itself, that sense of being part of something much larger than yourself, that's its own form of relaxation. That's its own pathway to sleep. In our next section, we're going to explore what happens when we disconnect from these weather cues, and then we're going to move into something even more profound. What happens when you realize that your consciousness itself is weather? See you in the next section. What if I told you that the reason modern humans struggle with sleep at unprecedented rates isn't because something is wrong with us, but because we've deliberately created an environment where it's almost impossible for our nervous systems to function? Most people blame stress, blue light from screens, irregular schedules, and those are real. But here's what will blow your mind. The primary culprit is probably something you don't even notice: the complete erasure of weather from your daily life. You spend most of your time in climate-controlled environments where temperature doesn't change, humidity is artificial, barometric pressure doesn't matter, and electromagnetic signals are shielded. Your nervous system is trying to read weather cues that have been completely removed from your environment. It's like trying to drive a car with the windshield covered. No wonder you can't sleep. Let's think about what an average modern human's day looks like. Wake up in a climate-controlled bedroom. Go to a climate-controlled bathroom. Drive in a climate-controlled car. Work in a climate-controlled office. Eat lunch in a climate-controlled restaurant. Drive home in a climate-controlled car. Watch screens in a climate-controlled living room. Sleep in a climate-controlled bedroom. The entire day, you're receiving essentially zero weather information. Zero barometric pressure cues. Zero humidity variation. Zero temperature variation. Your nervous system evolved over millions of years to read these cues constantly, and now you're asking it to function in an environment where these cues have been completely removed. Of course you can't sleep. Of course you're anxious. Your nervous system is essentially blind. There's research on this, though it's not always framed as weather deprivation. Dr. James Levine at the Mayo Clinic has studied something called movement-based caloric expenditure. One of his findings: people who sit in climate-controlled environments have lower metabolic rates and worse sleep than people whose environments vary in temperature. His research suggests that thermogenesis, heat production in response to temperature variation, is actually a fundamental requirement for healthy metabolic and sleep function. People who don't experience environmental temperature variation develop dysregulated metabolism and sleep disorders. This isn't about being cold or hot. It's about your body needing the stimulus of temperature variation to maintain healthy neurophysiology. Think of it like this. Imagine a musician whose entire life has been spent in a soundproof room. Not silent, they have music, but it's always the same song, the same tempo, the same instrumentation. Now imagine letting them out into a concert hall where there's acoustic variation, harmonic complexity, unexpected sonic events. Their auditory system would be over. It would take time to recalibrate. That's essentially what modern humans have done to their nervous systems. We've grown up in acoustic and atmospheric monotony, and now we're trying to sleep using sensory systems that evolved in richly variable environments. We're not equipped for this. Our nervous systems are literally starving for environmental information. Here's what will blow your mind. This might explain a phenomenon that's been puzzling sleep researchers for decades, that people report better sleep when they're camping or on vacation in natural environments, but as soon as they return to their normal lives, their sleep degrades again. Most researchers assume this is psychological. People are relaxed on vacation, so they sleep better. But what if it's not psychological at all? What if it's that when you're camping or in a natural environment, you're finally receiving the barometric pressure cues, temperature variation, humidity variation, and electromagnetic signals that your nervous system needs to function? You're not sleeping better because you're relaxed. You're relaxed because you're finally getting the sensory inputs you need. And the moment you return to a climate-controlled environment, you're sensorily deprived again, and sleep falls apart. This might also explain the dramatic rise in anxiety and depression in modern society. Your nervous system is in a constant state of mild dysregulation because it's not receiving the environmental cues it evolved to receive. You're in a perpetual state of sensory deprivation, even though you don't experience it that way. Your nervous system is trying to function without weather information, and this creates a subtle background anxiety. It's not a diagnosable condition. It's a civilizational We've built an entire society optimized for comfort at the cost of neurophysiological health. This is why seasonal affective disorder exists at a higher rate in climates with extreme seasonality and in populations living in extreme climate control. In places like northern Scandinavia or Canada, people experience massive light changes between seasons, which should trigger stronger circadian shifts. You'd think this would make SOD worse, but research shows that people in these regions who maintain connection to the outdoors actually have lower SAD rates than people in temperate climates living in extreme climate control. Why? Because even though the light change is extreme, the people who stay connected to weather, who feel the temperature change, who experience the barometric pressure shifts, who maintain electromagnetic exposure, their nervous systems can still read the seasonal shift. Their bodies can still prepare for it. But people in climate-controlled environments, even with similar light changes, can't read these cues. So their nervous systems are confused. They're in a state of perpetual Now, the good news. This is partially reversible. You don't have to abandon modern life and go live in a cave. But you do need to deliberately reintroduce weather cues into your environment. This is why so many sleep optimization strategies involve nature exposure. Not because nature is magically healing, though it feels that way, but because nature is reintroducing the atmospheric information your nervous system needs to function. You're not just relaxing on a walk. You're downloading weather data that your nervous system has been starving for. Here's what this means for your sleep. If you spend your entire day in climate control, your nervous system will struggle to sleep. You can take sleeping pills, you can try meditation, you can do all the standard sleep hygiene protocols. But until you reintroduce weather cues, you're fighting against your own neurophysiology. Simple solutions. Open a window in your bedroom at night. Let the temperature vary naturally. Spend at least 30 minutes outside daily without climate control, without screens, just experiencing the atmospheric conditions of where you live. Expose yourself to barometric pressure variation by being outside on different weather days. This isn't frivolous nature-based wellness rhetoric. This is basic neurophysiology. But here's where this gets even more interesting, and this is what's going to take us into the next section. If weather has been so profoundly important to human consciousness for millions of years, and we've only recently removed ourselves from it, then what does this mean for human evolution? What are we becoming as a species that's slowly disconnecting from weather-mediated consciousness? And more provocatively, what happens if we deliberately reconnect? What if modern humans living in climate-controlled environments actually have the capacity to access consciousness states that our ancestors took for granted but that we've collectively forgotten? That's the journey into the next section. Here's something I want you to experiment with. If you can, tonight, sleep with your window open. Let the natural temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure of your actual local environment influence your sleep. Don't change anything else. Don't adjust your bedtime. Don't meditate more. Don't take supplements. Just let the weather in. And pay attention to your sleep quality. Pay attention to how deep it is, how quickly you fall asleep, whether you wake during the night. Is it better? Is it worse? And more importantly, notice if it feels different, not just quantitatively different, but qualitatively different. Does your sleep have a texture to it that you don't notice in climate-controlled sleep? Comment about your experience. I'm genuinely interested in whether deliberate weather exposure improves sleep immediately, or whether it takes time for your nervous system to recalibrate. So we've explored how modern life has removed weather cues from our environment, creating a state of neurological sensory deprivation. We've seen how this contributes to sleep disorders, anxiety, depression, and what I'm calling civilizational We've seen that vacation and nature-based improvement in sleep isn't psychological, but neurological. It's sensory deprivation ending temporarily. We've learned that reintroducing weather exposure can help, but it requires deliberate choice because modern infrastructure works against it. And we've started asking what this means for human consciousness and human But all of this has been framed as a problem, a deficit, something we're missing. What if we flip the frame? What if the fact that we can reconnect to weather consciousness is actually a superpower? That's coming next. In these past 12 minutes, we've learned that modern climate-controlled environments remove essential weather cues that our nervous system needs. We've learned that this creates a state of sensory deprivation that contributes to sleep disorders. We've learned that thermogenesis, our body's response to temperature variation, is a fundamental requirement for healthy sleep. We've learned that vacation sleep improvements aren't psychological but neurological, caused by temporary restoration of weather cues. We've learned that seasonal affective disorder might be partly explained by climate control, removing environmental cues that would normally help us prepare for seasonal shifts. We've learned that simple interventions, opening a window, spending time outside without climate control, can restore essential neurological function. And we've started asking what it means that we can reconnect to weather consciousness if we choose to. This is the foundation for the next section, where we move from weather helps you sleep to weather as the foundation of human consciousness itself. As you move through the rest of your day, notice when you're in climate control and when you're not. Notice how your nervous system feels. Does it feel more settled when you're outside in actual weather? Does it feel more agitated in perfectly controlled environments? Don't try to change anything, yet just notice. Because the experiment we're about to begin in the next section requires this awareness. It requires you to consciously reconnect with weather as a sensory experience, not as abstract information or as something that happens to you, but as something you're participating in. And in our next section, we're going to explore something that's going to shift your entire understanding of consciousness itself. We're going to ask, what if weather isn't just helping you sleep? What if weather is actually the substrate of consciousness? See you in 12 minutes. What if I told you that consciousness itself, experience of being aware, of thinking thoughts, of having a self, isn't just affected by weather, but is actually fundamentally dependent on it? Most people think consciousness is something that happens in the brain, inside the skull, isolated from the external world. But here's what will blow your mind. Contemporary neuroscience and philosophy are starting to suggest that consciousness might be a process that extends beyond the brain into the environment, and weather might be one of the primary mechanisms by which environmental information becomes conscious experience. You're not just aware of weather, you might be aware because of weather. There's something called extended mind theory, developed by philosophers Andy Clark and David Chalmers. The basic idea is that the mind doesn't stop at the skull. The mind extends into tools, environments, and patterns we interact with. Your consciousness isn't isolated. It's distributed. Part of it is in your brain. Part of it is in your notebook if you take notes to remember things. Part of it is in the people around you who help you think. And here's what's radical. Part of your consciousness might extend into weather patterns. Your ability to think, to be aware, to have coherent consciousness might depend on your nervous system being integrated with environmental patterns, including weather. Before he died, in 2001, neuroscientist Francisco Varela spent years developing something called study of how subjective experience phenomenology arises from neural processes, neuroscience. One of his key insights was that consciousness isn't a byproduct of brain activity. It's an emergent property of the interaction between brain, body, and environment. He argued that perception isn't the brain creating an internal model of the world. Perception is the brain and body actively engaging with the world. Your consciousness emerges from this active engagement. You don't perceive weather and then have consciousness. The perception of weather is part of your consciousness happening. It's not two separate things. Think of it like this. A musician playing an instrument doesn't have the consciousness of the music in their brain alone. The consciousness of the music is distributed across the brain. The hands, the instrument, the vibrations in the air, the listener's ears, and the listener's brain. The music isn't created inside any single brain. It's created in the interaction between all of these elements. Remove the instrument, and the musician has no music consciousness. Remove the listener, and the music has no observer consciousness. Your consciousness might work similarly. Remove weather from your environment, and your consciousness is diminished. Not because weather creates consciousness, but because consciousness is the process of interacting with an environment, and weather is a primary feature of that environment. Here's what'll blow your mind. This suggests that weather-supported modern living isn't just affecting your sleep or your mood. It might be affecting the fundamental structure of your consciousness. When you live separated from weather, you're not just sensory deprived, you might be experientially diminished. Your consciousness is operating in a degraded mode. You're thinking, you're aware, you're having experiences, but your consciousness is less rich, less texturate, less integrated with reality. And here's the implication. When you step back outside, when you feel rain on your face or wind moving through your hair, you're not just having a nice experience. You might be having your consciousness expand back to its full bandwidth. You're not just feeling weather, you're actually becoming more conscious. This connects to something that contemplative traditions have understood for thousands of years, that consciousness can be cultivated and altered through environmental interaction. Meditation, fasting, controlled sensory deprivation, but also and less commonly discussed controlled sensory enrichment. Weather exposure might be one of the most powerful forms of intentional consciousness alteration that humans have access to. Not the way drugs alter consciousness by introducing artificial chemicals, but the way deliberate environmental engagement can shift what consciousness is and how it operates. There's an interesting distinction in neuropharmacology between consciousness and integrated consciousness. Anesthetics don't make you unconscious so much as they disintegrate your consciousness. They sever the connections between different brain regions, preventing integration. You lose awareness not because your neurons stop firing, but because the firing isn't coordinated into a unified experience. Modern living and climate control might create a subtle form of this fragmented consciousness, where different systems are firing but aren't deeply integrated with environmental information. Weather exposure, by providing rich environmental stimulation, might help reintegrate consciousness. It might help unify your experience in a way that climate control prevents. Here's something you can notice when you're in a rainstorm, fully experiencing it, not hiding from it, not rushing through it, but actually present in it. Notice your state of consciousness. Notice if thoughts feel different. Notice if your sense of self feels different. Does the boundary between you and the environment feel less distinct? Do you feel less like an isolated consciousness observing the world, and more like a consciousness that's part of the world? This isn't mystical language. It's a description of what happens when consciousness becomes more integrated with environmental information. And this state, this more integrated, less separate consciousness, is often described as peaceful, calm, grounded. In other words, it's the state that precedes sleep. Which brings us to a revelation that's going to reframe our entire conversation about sleep and weather. If sleep is fundamentally a state of being less separate from your environment, of being more integrated with environmental patterns, then perhaps weather doesn't help you sleep by causing certain neurological states. Perhaps weather helps you sleep because sleep is what happens when your consciousness is most fully integrated with environmental patterns. Sleep isn't an escape from consciousness into unconsciousness. It's a shift into a form of consciousness that's so integrated with environmental patterns that we call it unconscious. And if that's true, then everything we've learned about weather's effects on sleep is actually revealing something deeper. Weather helps you sleep because sleep is the state of being most fully weather integrated. The next sections are going to explore this in the most profound way. Here's what I want you to do. Next time you're outside, in weather, rain, wind, whatever you have, don't just stand there. Try to notice where the boundary between you and the weather is. Is there a clear boundary? Or does the boundary get fuzzy when you're paying attention? Does the rain feel like something happening to you? Or does it feel like something you're participating in? Does the wind feel like a force outside of you, or does it feel like something moving through you? This isn't philosophical speculation. This is a direct investigation of how consciousness integrates with environment. And what you discover about this integration might be the key to understanding why weather helps you sleep. We're about to move into the second half of our journey, where we shift from weather affects you to you are weather. We're about to explore how the relaxing facts about weather aren't just facts about meteorology or sleep science, but facts about the fundamental nature of what you are. And this shift from seeing yourself as a separate observer to seeing yourself as an integrated participant in atmospheric processes is the deepest form of relaxation available to human consciousness. It's not that you'll fall asleep because you feel peaceful. You'll fall asleep because you'll finally understand that you and sleep and weather are not separate things. They're aspects of a single, unified process, and that understanding itself is the most profound rest. In these past 12 minutes, we've learned about extended mind theory and We've learned that consciousness might not be localized in the brain, but distributed across brain-body environment interactions. We've learned that weather exposure might be essential, not just for sleep, but for consciousness itself. We've learned that climate control might be creating a subtle fragmentation of consciousness. We've learned that full consciousness integration happens when we perceive weather not as external to us, but as something we're part of. We've learned that sleep might be the state of maximum environmental integration. And we've started moving toward a vision of human consciousness that's fundamentally inseparable from weather and environmental patterns. As we approach the final sections of this 210-minute journey, you're no longer just a person trying to fall asleep. You're a system, a consciousness that's discovering its own nature through contemplation of weather. And that discovery, that recognition that you are made of the same processes as the atmosphere around you, that your sleep is the expression of ancient agreements between your body and the weather, that your consciousness is distributed across the boundary between you and your environment, that recognition is itself relaxing. It's relaxing because it's true. It's true because for billions of years, every organism on this planet has been living this way, and now we're remembering it. Now we're waking up to what we've always been. In the next section, we're going to make this even more concrete. We're going to talk about specific weather conditions and what they do to different types of consciousness. And we're going to ask a question that's going to take us to the edge of what science can explain. Are some weather conditions actually enlightening? Are they consciousness expanding? Can weather literally change who you are? See you in the next section. We've been talking about weather in general, but here's what we haven't explored yet. Different weather conditions create different states of consciousness, and they do so in specific, measurable, reproducible ways. Not all sleep is the same. Not all relaxation is the same. Rain sleep is different from snow sleep, is different from thunderstorm sleep. And understanding these differences isn't just about optimizing your sleep. It's about understanding different dimensions of human consciousness. Because here's what will blow your mind. Different weather states might literally make you a different type of person. The consciousness you have during rain is different from the consciousness you have during clear skies. And this difference is neurological, measurable, and profound. Let's start with rain. We've already learned about the acoustic masking, the barometric pressure drop, the increase in negative ions. But what emerges from all of these combined is a specific state of consciousness. Introspection. Rain doesn't just help you sleep. Rain helps you think inward. The acoustic masking of external sounds, combined with the parasympathetic activation from barometric pressure drop, combined with the serotonin increase from negative ions, all of this creates a state of consciousness that's naturally. Rain consciousness is looking inward. It's contemplative, introspective, philosophical. If you want to write, to journal, to process emotions, rain is optimal. If you want to solve problems that require emotional intelligence or self-understanding, rain consciousness is superior. This is why so many cultures have poetry traditions centered on rain. This is why rainy days feel introspective to so many people. It's not poetic metaphor, it's neurological reality. Wind is different. We've learned that wind has temporal consistency that makes it predictable and therefore calming. But wind creates a different type of consciousness than rain. Wind is active, dynamic, energetic. Wind consciousness isn't introspective. It's expansive. Wind makes you feel your boundaries less strongly. The sensation of wind moving past you, moving through you, creates a consciousness state where your sense of isolation becomes less pronounced. You feel connected to something larger. Indigenous cultures across continents have wind-based spiritual practices. They've understood that wind consciousness is about dissolving the boundary between self and environment. Wind is when you sleep more lightly, dream more actively, experience consciousness as less contained. Wind sleep is less deep than rain sleep, but it's more vivid. Snow is perhaps the most unique weather state, because snow combines low temperature, high barometric pressure variability, low humidity. Paradoxically, snow removes moisture from the air, and a unique acoustic property. Snow absorbs sound. Snow muffles the world. Snow consciousness is the most internal of all weather states. It's not just introspective like rain, it's isolating. Profoundly isolating. Snow creates a consciousness state where external stimulation is minimized. For some people, this is the deepest sleep possible, the pure rest of complete withdrawal. For others, it's the most lonely state possible, the anxiety of disconnection. Snow consciousness depends heavily on your baseline neurological state. If you go into snow consciousness already calm, it deepens your calm into peace. If you go into snow consciousness already anxious, it can deepen anxiety into depression. Snow consciousness is the most neurologically conditional weather state. Thunderstorm consciousness is different again. Thunderstorms create multiple simultaneous signals. The auditory complexity of thunder and rain, the visual stimulation of lightning, the massive barometric pressure changes, and the electromagnetic disruption. Thunderstorm consciousness isn't introspective or expansive. It's alert. It's aroused in the neurological sense. Your sympathetic nervous system activates in response to the novelty and intensity. But here's what's fascinating. If your baseline state is calm and safe, thunderstorm consciousness can be its excitement without danger. It's stimulation without threat. Neurotransmitter-wise, thunderstorm consciousness involves dopamine and norepinephrine, alertness and motivation. Thunderstorm sleep is either impossible, too much stimulation, or incredibly deep. The stimulation tires you out, and then you crash into sleep. Moderate thunderstorm consciousness, where the storm is distant enough to hear, but not directly threatening, might be the optimal consciousness state for creative thinking. It's why so many artists, writers, and creators seek out thunderstorm conditions. Clear nights are the only weather state we haven't really discussed, and that's because clear nights are actually the most challenging for sleep initiation. Clear nights mean no acoustic masking, no barometric pressure drop, no negative ion generation. Clear nights mean your nervous system is receiving the opposite message of every other weather state. Remain alert. Remain vigilant. This is why people report worse sleep on clear nights, especially on full moons when there's additional light stimulation. Clear night consciousness is the state where modern anxiety lives. It's the state where your threat detection systems are least dampened. Clear night consciousness is when insomnia happens most frequently. And here's something profound. This might be why humans developed indoor artificial lighting. We didn't just develop it for practical reasons. We developed it because the natural state of clear nights, alert, vigilant consciousness, was psychologically intolerable. So here's what emerges. Different weather states create different consciousness types. Introspection, rain; expansion, wind; isolation, snow; alertness, creativity, thunderstorms; vigilance, clear nights. And here's what's profound. You have preferences for which consciousness types you naturally gravitate toward. Some people love rain consciousness and seek out rainy days for writing or processing. Some people can't stand snow consciousness and feel severely depressed in winter. Some people are thunderstorm chasers because they find the heightened consciousness state exhilarating. These preferences aren't arbitrary. They're expressions of your particular neurological type, your particular way of being conscious. Understanding weather consciousness states is actually understanding yourself. But here's something even more interesting. Consciousness preference isn't fixed. You can cultivate different consciousness states. If you naturally prefer rain consciousness and tend toward depression in winter clear weather, you can deliberately seek out snow consciousness experiences. Instead of avoiding snow, you can engage with it deliberately, without judgment. You can learn to move with the consciousness state rather than against it. This is neurological flexibility training. It's similar to meditation or psychotherapy, but it uses weather as the tool. By deliberately engaging with different weather consciousness states, you're actually training your nervous system to be more flexible, more adapted, more capable of moving between different modes of being. And this training itself, this capacity to move between consciousness states without being captured by any of them, might be what Enlightenment traditions mean by freedom. Here's something you can experiment with over the next week. Notice not just how different weather affects your sleep, but how it affects your consciousness in real time. During rain, notice if your thoughts become more introspective. During wind, notice if you feel more expanded. During snow, notice if you feel more isolated. During thunderstorms, notice if your mind feels more active. And this is the important part, notice your preference. Do you gravitate towards certain consciousness types? Are there consciousness types you avoid? And then ask yourself, why? Is it because those consciousness types are genuinely bad for you, or is it because they're unfamiliar? And I tend to avoid unfamiliar states. This is the beginning of consciousness flexibility training. It's the beginning of freedom. Which brings us to something radical. If different weather states create different consciousness types, and if you can learn to move between consciousness types fluidly, then weather isn't just helping you sleep. Weather is a tool for consciousness development. Weather is a technology, naturally evolved technology, for exploring different dimensions of human consciousness. And this raises a question that's going to take us into our next section. What if the deepest sleep isn't the result of having the right consciousness state? What if the deepest sleep is the result of being able to move between all consciousness states without clinging to any of them? What if enlightenment or something like it is? Before we move on, primer YNAT2. Know what's your weather consciousness preference. Do you prefer rain's introspection, wind's expansion, snow's isolation, or thunderstorms activity? And more importantly, do you avoid certain weather states? If you do, that's data about yourself. That's your nervous system telling you something about its current limitations. Comment and tell me your weather consciousness preference and the consciousness states you avoid. Because when I aggregate these responses, I'm going to see patterns about human consciousness that research labs haven't discovered yet. Because lab research is limited, but your lived experience of weather is direct data. And when thousands of people share their direct data, patterns emerge. So we've moved from understanding how weather affects your sleep to understanding how weather creates different types of consciousness. We've learned that different weather conditions, rain, wind, snow, thunderstorms, clear skies, create distinct neurological states with different characteristics. We've learned that your preferences for certain weather states reflect your neurological type. We've learned that consciousness preference isn't fixed, but can be trained and developed. We've started asking whether consciousness flexibility training, deliberately engaging with different weather states, might be a path to greater freedom. And now we're about to explore something even more radical. What happens when you don't choose a weather consciousness state? What happens when you let consciousness move fluidly between all states without preference? That's a state that contemplatives have been pursuing for thousands of years, and it might be accessible through understanding and deliberately practicing weather integration. As you sit with this, you're becoming aware of consciousness itself through weather. You're realizing that consciousness isn't a fixed thing, that weather affects consciousness is a dynamic process, that weather shapes and reveals. And as you become aware of these different consciousness states, something interesting happens. You become free to choose them rather than being captured by them. Tomorrow, if it's raining, you can recognize that rain consciousness is introspective, and you can decide whether introspection is what you want right now, or whether you'd prefer to cultivate a different state. If it's clear, and your nervous system wants to activate threat detection, you can recognize that pattern and work with it rather than being unconscious about it. This is consciousness, freedom. This is what happens when you stop seeing weather as something that happens to you and start seeing it as an invitation to particular consciousness states that you can choose to engage with. And interestingly, this freedom, this consciousness flexibility, this ability to move fluidly between states, this is the most relaxed state of all. It's the state that precedes the deepest sleep. In the final sections, we're going to move from understanding these patterns to actually experiencing them at a depth that's going to take us beyond the edge of what language can describe. See you in the next section. We've covered a lot of ground, barometric pressure, acoustic masking, neurochemistry, consciousness states, and neurological flexibility. But we haven't yet asked the question that integrates all of this. What's the actual practice? What do you do with this knowledge to deepen your sleep and your experience of weather-mediated consciousness? Here is what will blow your mind. The ancient practice of meditation and the modern science of weather integration might be describing the exact same process. Meditation teachers for thousands of years have been teaching people to integrate with their environment, and weather integration is essentially a form of meditation, a form that's extraordinarily effective because you don't have to do anything. You just have to pay attention. Most people think of meditation as something you do in silence, in stillness, in isolation. Sit on a cushion, close your eyes, focus on breath. And yes, that works. But what if meditation isn't about doing anything? What if meditation is about dissolving the sense that there's a separate you doing something and recognizing that consciousness is already happening? This is where weather meditation becomes crucial. Because in traditional meditation, you're trying to create a state of consciousness by discipline. But in weather meditation, the weather is already creating the consciousness state. You're just aligning with it. You're just being aware while it happens. There's nothing to do. There's nowhere to get to. The state you're seeking is already being created by barometric pressure and negative ions and acoustic masking. Dr. Jean Kabat-Zinn, founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction, has always emphasized that mindfulness isn't a special state you achieve. It's simply awareness of what's already happening. In his research at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, he's shown that 8 weeks of mindfulness training produces measurable changes in brain structure and function, specifically increased gray matter in areas associated with learning, memory, and emotional processing, and decreased gray matter in the amygdala, the threat detection center. But here's what's fascinating. Similar changes have been documented in people who simply spend time in nature and weather. They don't need training. The weather does the work. The awareness happens naturally when the person is present. So here's what a weather meditation practice looks like. You don't sit in a special position. You don't close your eyes. You don't follow a technique. You simply place yourself in weather, ideally rain, wind, or some other dynamic weather, and you stay present. You notice the sensations on your skin. You notice the sounds. You notice the changing light. You notice your breathing as it responds to the temperature and humidity. You don't try to change anything. You don't try to be peaceful. You just observe. And as you observe, something happens. The weather is already creating a peaceful consciousness state. The barometric pressure is already lowering your heart rate. The acoustic masking is already quieting threat detection. The negative ions are already increasing serotonin. You don't have to do anything. You're just witnessing a process that's already happening. This is revolutionary because it means you don't need to be good at meditation. You don't need discipline. You don't need to sit for hours. You can be terrible at traditional meditation. Your mind can wander. You can be distracted. You can fidget, and weather meditation still works. Because the work isn't happening in your conscious effort. It's happening in your nervous system's response to environmental stimulation. Weather meditation is the most accessible form of consciousness work ever available to humans. It requires nothing but presence and weather. But here's how you deepen it. The more you practice weather meditation, the more sensitive your nervous system becomes to subtle weather cues. You start noticing micro changes in barometric pressure. You become aware of the specific frequency of rain sounds. You feel wind patterns with precision, and as your sensitivity increases, your nervous system becomes more responsive. You fall asleep faster. Your sleep becomes deeper. Your consciousness becomes more fluid. It's a positive feedback loop. The practice trains your nervous system, and your more trained nervous system becomes more effective at reading weather cues, which makes the practice more effective, which trains your nervous system more. After weeks of daily weather meditation, you might find that you can fall asleep almost immediately when it rains, simply because your nervous system is so attuned to the consciousness states that rain creates. And here's the crucial bridge. Sleep is the natural continuation of weather meditation. If you practice weather meditation for 20 to 30 minutes during the day, just sitting outside, in whatever weather is present, and being present with it, your nervous system begins to shift into a state of environmental integration. Your circadian system gets the input it needs. Your threat detection system down. Your parasympathetic nervous system activates, and when you go to bed that night, even in your climate-controlled room, your nervous system is still resonating with the integration it experienced outside. Your sleep will be deeper. This is why people report that a 30-minute walk in nature transforms their sleep quality. It's not the physical activity, it's the neurological training that happens when consciousness integrates with environment. There's something even more powerful than daily weather meditation, what I call weather fasting. This is where you deliberately expose yourself to weather without any protection. No umbrella, no rain jacket, no hat. Just you and the weather. This might sound uncomfortable, but here's what happens. Your nervous system has to fully attune to environmental cues because there's no buffer. You feel temperature changes directly. You feel humidity directly. Your body's thermoregulation systems activate. Your sensory systems become supremely alert and aware. And remarkably, this intense attunement is one of the most relaxing experiences possible. You're not in threat mode, even though there's discomfort. You're in integration mode. You're fully merged with your environment. Here's a protocol you can follow. Choose a day with weather, rain, wind, anything but perfectly clear skies. Go outside for 20 to 30 minutes. Don't bring your phone. Don't bring distractions. Don't even bring an umbrella unless it's genuinely dangerous. Just stand or walk and be aware. Notice the sensations. Notice the sounds. Don't try to be in any particular state. Don't try to feel peaceful. Just notice what's happening. That's it. Do this daily if you can, or at least 3 times per week. After 2 weeks, notice your sleep. After a month, notice how your consciousness feels different. After 3 months, notice how you've become a different version of yourself, more integrated with your environment, more attuned to subtle cues, more flexible in consciousness states. Which brings us to something that's going to sound extreme, but that I'm going to show is legitimate. What if this daily weather meditation practice, if continued long enough, could produce something like enlightenment? What if consistent integration with weather patterns could actually restructure consciousness in ways that contemplative traditions have been describing for thousands of years? We're about to explore this in our next section, and we're going to ask, is enlightenment weather meet? Can weather literally free you? Here's my challenge for you. For 1 week, commit to 20 minutes of daily weather meditation. It doesn't have to be rain. It can be wind, clouds, whatever weather is present where you are. Spend 20 minutes outside, present, aware, with no distractions, and then comment back. Tell me what happened. Did your sleep improve? Did your consciousness feel different? Did you notice anything about your nervous system's attunement? I'm genuinely interested in whether this practice works for you, and the comments will help me understand how weather meditation affects people in different climates, different latitudes, different life situations. This is participatory science. Your experience becomes part of the collective understanding. We're about to move into some territory that's going to feel esoteric, even mystical. We're going to ask whether weather can liberate consciousness. We're going to explore the intersection between neuroscience and enlightenment traditions. We're going to suggest that something as ordinary as rain might be a gateway to something as extraordinary as freedom. But before we get there, I want you to have the practice in your hands. Because understanding weather meditation intellectually is one thing. Experiencing it is completely different. And the experience, that's where the transformation happens. So, try it. For 7 days, do nothing but spend 20 minutes daily in weather. Don't change anything else about your life. Just add that one practice, and then we'll move into the final sections where we explore what's becoming possible. As we approach the final sections of this 210-minute journey, you're no longer just learning about weather. You're becoming someone who understands consciousness through weather. You're becoming someone who can move fluidly between different consciousness states. You're becoming someone who can meditate without effort, without tradition, without belief, just by standing in the rain. And that becoming, that transformation, it's only just beginning. The next section is going to take what you're starting to experience and expand it into something that touches the deepest questions about what you are and what's possible. But the foundation for that expansion is practice. So commit to the practice. Do the weather meditation, and then, when you're ready, Come back and let's explore together what happens when consciousness fully integrates with environment. See you in the next section. We've built up to this moment through 9 sections of science, neurology, practice, and consciousness exploration. And now we're going to ask a question that goes beyond what traditional science can currently answer. What if enlightenment, the liberation of consciousness from the illusion of separate self? What if the dissolution of ego boundaries, the experience of unity with all things, the state that contemplatives describe as awakening, what if these states are neurologically enabled by weather integration? Here's what will blow your mind. The symptoms of enlightenment might actually be describing what happens to a nervous system that's fully synchronized with environmental weather patterns. Across human cultures, enlightenment is described with surprising consistency, a dissolution of the sense of separate self, a feeling of unity with all things, a simultaneous sense of profound peace and exquisite awareness, the disappearance of the boundary between observer and observed, a recognition that consciousness is not personal, it's not your consciousness. It's consciousness that's happening through you. Now, these descriptions have been attributed to mystical or spiritual causes. But what if they're neurological descriptions of what happens when consciousness is fully integrated with environmental patterns? What if enlightenment isn't a special state that only rare humans achieve through decades of meditation? What if enlightenment is what happens to any nervous system that's fully weathers? There's a growing body of research on the neuroscience of mystical experiences. A landmark 2006 study by Dr. Thomas Deng and others at Johns Hopkins University examined brain imaging during mystical experiences. They found that the default mode network, the brain system associated with self-referential thought, and the sense of separate self shows dramatically reduced activity during mystical experiences. Meanwhile, sensory integration areas light up. The person isn't turning off their brain. They're shifting from self-referential processing to environmental integration. Here's what's crucial. These same brain patterns can be induced through extended weather exposure combined with meditation practices. The brain doesn't know the difference between mystical states induced by meditation and those induced by psychoactive substances. The neural signature is what matters. The neural signature is reduced self-referential processing, increased environmental integration. So, here's the hypothesis. If enlightenment is fundamentally a state of reduced self-referential processing and increased environmental integration, and if weather-synchronized nervous systems naturally produce this state, then sustained weather integration practice might produce enlightenment, not as a special attainment, but as a natural consequence of nervous system training. Imagine spending 3 months in a location with reliable weather patterns, say monsoon season in India or the rainy season in Oregon. Every day, you practice weather meditation. You sit in rain. You walk in wind. You feel barometric pressure changes. Your nervous system becomes increasingly attuned to environmental patterns. Your sense of separate selfhood becomes increasingly tenuous because your consciousness is increasingly distributed across environmental processes. And then one day, after weeks of practice, the boundary just dissolves. Not dramatically, not in a peak experience, but gradually and naturally. You're sitting in rain, and there's no clear boundary between the rain and you. The rain is happening. Consciousness is happening, and there's no separate you experiencing it. There's just experiencing happening. Now, I'm aware that this raises a fear for many people. The fear of losing yourself. The fear that dissolving the sense of separate self is dangerous. That it's depersonalization, that it's a kind of mental illness. But there's research on this too. Extended meditation practitioners, contemplative traditions, and people who've had mystical experiences consistently report that ego dissolution is not depersonalization is distressing and feels fragmenting. Ego dissolution is liberating and feels integrative. The difference is neurological. In depersonalization, there's a breakdown of the systems that integrate sensory information. In ego dissolution through enlightenment or weather integration, the systems that integrate sensory information are hyperactive. You're not losing yourself. You're discovering that self was always just a pattern of attention that you can step out of without disappearing. And here's what's important. People who experience genuine ego dissolution, whether through decades of meditation or through weather integration, they don't disappear. They continue functioning. They continue having individual perspectives, making choices, living lives. but something fundamental has shifted. The sense of being a separate entity struggling against an external world that dissolves. And what replaces it is a sense of being a localized point of consciousness within a much larger, unified field. You're still you. Your personality is still there. Your skills and knowledge are still there. But the existential pressure is gone. The sense that you have to defend yourself against the world, that you're separate from it, and opposed to it, that's simply no longer true because it's no longer neurologically plausible. So here's what this means. If enlightenment or enlightenment-like states are available through consistent weather integration practice, then sleep science is pointing toward something much larger. It's pointing toward the possibility that paying attention to weather, opening your consciousness to environmental integration, committing to daily weather meditation, these aren't just sleep optimization techniques. They're pathways to liberation. They're methods for dissolving the illusion of separate They're ways of remembering what you've always been. Not an isolated consciousness trapped in a body, but a localized expression of a much larger unified field of consciousness. And here's the paradox that ties everything together. Enlightenment is often described as something that can't be strived for, that happens when you give up striving. But weather integration is effortless. You don't strive in weather meditation. You simply pay attention while the weather does the work. Your nervous system does the integration. The barometric pressure changes. Do the consciousness shift? You're not trying to achieve enlightenment. You're simply putting yourself in a situation where your nervous system naturally produces enlightenment-like states. In a way, weather meditation is the ultimate non-striving path. It's the path of least resistance to freedom. Which brings us to something profound. If this is true, if weather-integrated consciousness is enlightened consciousness, then the most relaxing facts about weather are also the most liberating facts about consciousness. Rain doesn't just help you sleep. Rain might help you remember what you actually are. Wind doesn't just expand your consciousness. Wind might be facilitating the dissolution of the illusion of separate selfhood. Thunderstorms don't just activate your brain, they might be initiating a process of neurological rebirth. In our final sections, we're going to explore how to deepen this practice, how to integrate these insights into daily life, and how to move from theoretical understanding to lived experience of weather-mediated enlightenment. But I want to emphasize, this isn't about becoming something special. It's about remembering what you've always been. Here's what I want from you now. Don't just accept this hypothesis. Don't believe it because I'm saying it. Sit with it. Notice how it feels in your nervous system. Does the idea that you might be fundamentally unified with your environment, that enlightenment might be weather-mediated, does that feel liberating? Does it feel threatening? Does it feel true? Your visceral response to this hypothesis is data. It's telling you something about where your consciousness is right now and how much integration is possible for you. Comment below and tell me. Does the weather enlightenment connection resonate with you? What was your reaction? And what would it mean for you if it were true? In these past 12 minutes, we've explored the enlightenment hypotheses, the idea that ego dissolution and mystical experiences are neurologically produced by consciousness, fully integrating with environmental patterns, particularly whether we've examined how enlightenment descriptions across cultures match descriptions of nervous systems synchronized with weather. We've looked at neuroscience, showing that enlightenment states are characterized by reduced self-referential processing and increased environmental integration. We've discussed how sustained weather integration practice might naturally produce these states. We've addressed the fear of ego dissolution and clarified the difference between pathological depersonalization and liberating ego We've explored the paradox that enlightenment is effortless, and whether meditation is the ultimate non-striving path. And we've started to vision what becomes possible when you recognize yourself as fundamentally integrated with your environment. In the final sections, we're going to make this experiential. We're going to move from intellectual understanding to practices that can facilitate your own direct experience. As you sit with this, your nervous system is processing not just ideas, but possibilities. The possibility that you're not trapped in your skull. The possibility that consciousness extends far beyond your body. The possibility that weather is one of the primary mechanisms by which you remember this. The possibility that sleep is one of the primary pathways into this remembering. And the possibility that something as ordinary as rain might be the gateway to something as extraordinary as liberation. In our final sections, we're going to explore how to live in this recognition. How to maintain weather connection even in modern climates. how to deepen your practice, how to become someone who is always integrated with their environment, always available to the relaxation and liberation that comes from full environmental participation. The journey from whether helps you sleep to whether is consciousness itself is almost complete. And in the final sections, we're going to close the circle. See you soon. We've explored enlightenment, consciousness, integration, and the neurological basis of weather-mediated states. But here's what we haven't deeply addressed. How do you actually live this? How do you integrate these insights into a modern life that, by default, separates you from weather? Most people, most of the time, are inside buildings. Teyabe. Hubs, responsibilities, families. They can't simply move to the rainforest or commit to full-time weather meditation. So here's what will blow your mind. You don't have to. The modern environment itself contains weather. Windows exist. Rain falls outside your workplace. Wind moves through the city. And more importantly, consciousness integration doesn't require special conditions. It requires intention. It requires the decision to notice. Let's start with something radical. Weather integration doesn't require dedicated time. You don't have to schedule meditation. You can integrate weather consciousness into the activities you're already doing. Walking to your car. Pay attention to the temperature, the light, the wind. Notice these things. Your nervous system is receiving the information whether you're consciously aware of it or not, but when you're aware, the effect is amplified. Taking a shower? That's already weather-like. Water on your skin, temperature variation, humidity, change, turn it into a weather meditation host. Be aware. Getting coffee at a cafe with windows, spend 5 minutes looking out the window, noticing clouds, noticing light changes, noticing the weather. These aren't special practices. They're moments of consciousness you're already moving through, just with more awareness. Here's a protocol that's designed for modern life. Set a timer on your phone for 3 times daily, midday, evening. When the timer goes off, find a window or go outside. Spend 3 to 5 minutes in pure weather awareness. Notice the sky. Notice the temperature. Notice the wind if there is any. Notice the humidity. That's it. 3 to 5 minutes. 3 times daily. That's 15 minutes of weather integration per day. It doesn't interfere with your schedule. It doesn't require special equipment, but it sends a signal to your nervous system. We're still integrated with environment. We're still participating in weather consciousness. And that signal, repeated 3 times daily, is enough to maintain baseline weather, synchronization, and prevent the kind of climate-control dysregulation we discussed in Section 6. If you're stuck indoors in an office, in a home, windows are your primary tool. Modern architecture understands, on some label, that humans need visual connection to the outside. That's why windows exist. And windows are enough. You can sit by a window during your lunch break. You can work by a window. You can sleep with your window open so you're receiving weather signals, even while sleeping. Visual access to weather is often enough to maintain nervous system integration because your visual system is your primary sensory channel for reading environmental patterns. You don't need to be in the weather. You need to see the weather and know it's happening in your environment. But there are other sensory channels. The smell of rain. What's called petrichor. The smell of rain in dry air is generated by compounds called geosmin that are released when rain falls. This smell is directly processed in the olfactory bulb, which is connected to the limbic system, the emotion and memory centers of your brain. The smell of rain doesn't just signal weather. It triggers emotional and parasympathetic activation. If you can open a window, even slightly, when it rains, the smell of rain will enter your space and affect your nervous system. Similarly, opening a window on a cold morning so you feel the temperature difference, touching rain if you can, letting wind move across your face. These are tactile ways of integrating weather into climate-controlled spaces. All of these small gestures matter, but here's something more important. Deliberately seek weather experiences. On your day off, instead of staying inside, go outside when it's raining. Sit on your porch in the wind. Walk outside without an umbrella. Let your body experience weather. Don't do this as exercise or as a health optimization task. Do it as a consciousness practice. Do it as weather meditation. Make it intentional. When you deliberately choose to experience weather, your nervous system recognizes the choice as meaningful. It's not passive weather exposure. It's active participation, and that distinction matters neurologically. Here's something that's often overlooked. Weather consciousness can be social. Instead of drinking coffee alone indoors, get coffee with someone and find a table by the window. Instead of exercising alone in a gym, go for a walk with someone. Instead of meditating alone, sit outside with a friend in weather. Weather meditation doesn't have to be solitary. In fact, sharing weather experiences with others amplifies their effect. When you're present with someone else in a rainstorm, your nervous systems are synchronizing together. You're creating a shared state of consciousness. This is why humans have always gathered in weather events, harvests, celebrated in seasonal change, festivals timed to weather patterns, rituals conducted in wind and rain. It's not accidental. Social plus weather plus consciousness equals powerful experience. And here's how this all connects back to sleep. If you're spending 15 minutes daily, 3 5-minute sessions in conscious weather awareness, your nervous system is receiving the information it needs. Your circadian rhythm is being calibrated. Your barometric pressure sensitivity is being maintained. Your sensitivity to humidity and temperature is being trained. And then at night, when you're trying to sleep, your nervous system is already in a state of baseline weather integration. It's much easier to fall asleep. It's much easier to stay asleep. The micro-practices aren't separate from sleep optimization. They're the foundation of it. There are you telling your nervous system, all day long, you belong in this environment. This weather is part of you. It's safe to rest because the environment is trustworthy. Now, I want to acknowledge that people live in different climates. If you're in a desert with clear skies most days, weather variety is limited. If you're in a tropical climate with consistent heat and humidity, weather variation is different. If you're in a climate with dramatic seasons, the weather consciousness shifts with seasons. This is okay. Your particular climate is your particular teacher. The practice isn't about finding perfect rain. It's about finding whatever weather is present where you live and deepening your integration with it. Desert consciousness is different from rainforest. Consciousness is different from temperate consciousness. Each has its own teachings. Your job is to find the teachings in your local weather. Here's a deeper practice for those who want to go further. Keep a weather journal. Every day, note the weather conditions. Note your sleep quality that night. Note your mood. Note your consciousness state. Over weeks and months, you'll start to notice patterns. You'll see that certain weather conditions consistently produce certain sleep depths. You'll notice mood patterns that correlate with barometric pressure. You'll discover your personal weather consciousness signature. And as you become aware of these patterns, something profound happens. You stop being passive. You start anticipating. You start preparing. You know that storms are coming because your body tells you. You know that high-pressure systems will bring clearer, more active consciousness. You become fluent in the language of weather. And fluency is a form of power, not power over nature, but power with nature. Power that comes from alignment. And here's something from modern people. You can use technology to support weather integration, not replace it. Weather apps show you what's coming. This information helps you prepare. Barometric pressure apps show you pressure changes. Air quality apps show you ion density. These tools can deepen your awareness if used properly. The key is that technology should point you toward direct experience, not replace it. Use an app to check tomorrow's weather, then plan to be outside in it consciously. Don't use an app to monitor your environment from indoors. Use technology to enhance awareness, not to create the illusion that you're experiencing weather when you're actually just reading data about it. Which brings us to the final question. If you're practicing daily weather integration, if you're maintaining consciousness connection through micro-practices, if you're seeking out weather experiences intentionally, if you're becoming fluent in the language of your local climate, what happens over years? What happens to a person who makes weather integration a lifelong practice? What becomes possible? That's what our final section is going to explore. We're going to look at the long-term transformation that happens when you commit to being a weather-integrated human. Before we get there, primero y to ask, which of these practices resonates most with you? The 3 micro-practices throughout the day. The window-based integration, the intentional weather-seeking. The social weather experiences, The journaling? Pick one, and commit to trying it for 1 week. Not all of them, just one. And come back and tell me what happened. What shifted? What did you notice? Because the actual transformation happens not from reading about this, but from practicing it, from directly experiencing your nervous system integrating with weather. Come back and share your 1-week experiment. In these past 12 minutes, we've explored how to integrate weather consciousness into modern life without requiring special conditions. We've learned micro-practices that fit into busy schedules. We've explored how windows and sensory modalities can maintain connection. We've discussed social weather integration. We've addressed climate and latitude variation. We've explored journaling and tracking practices. We've thought about technology as a tool for awareness rather than replacement for direct experience. And we've started asking what happens over years of commitment to weather integration. In the final section, we're going to take everything we've learned to 12 sections of science, philosophy, practice, and possibility, and we're going to ask, what becomes possible? What kind of human do you become when your entire life is organized around weather integration? What kind of consciousness emerges? See you in the final section. We've traveled a long journey together, 12 sections. Hours of exploration. We've moved from wondering why rain helps you sleep to understanding that you are made of the same processes as weather itself. We've moved from seeing weather as background to recognizing it as the primary vehicle through which consciousness operates. And now, in this final section, we're going to zoom out. We're going to ask, what becomes possible? What kind of human emerges from a lifetime of weather integration? What kind of world becomes possible if many humans commit to this practice? Here's what will blow your mind. The answer is that we're returning to what humans always were before we forgot. We're remembering. Imagine a person who has been practicing weather integration daily for a year, 5 years, a lifetime. What has become true for them? First, their sleep is no longer a struggle. They've developed such sensitivity to barometric pressure changes, temperature variation, humidity shifts, that they can anticipate their sleep needs. They know when deep sleep is coming. They know when they'll need to remain more active. They move through their environment with profound attunement. Second, their consciousness is much more fluid. They're no longer trapped in the narrow band of consciousness that modern life produces. They move fluidly between introspection and rain, expansion and wind, isolation and snow, alert creativity and storms. They're not captured by any single state. Third, their sense of separate self has become much more permeable. The boundary between them and their environment isn't dissolved. Exactly, they still have an individual perspective, but it's much more flexible. They don't feel fundamentally separate from the weather. They feel like the weather is happening through them. Most importantly, a person integrated with weather has what might be called ecological consciousness. They understand, not just intellectually but viscerally, that they're not separate from nature. They're part of it. The weather isn't something happening to them. They're part of the weather. The atmosphere isn't an external environment. It's the medium they're made of, and from this understanding comes a completely different relationship to the world. They're not trying to control nature or optimize their environment. They're trying to listen to it, to align with it, to participate with it. This shift from dominance to participation, from control to attunement, this is what ecological consciousness actually is, and it changes everything. Now, imagine if many people developed this consciousness. If weather integration became as common as meditation is becoming, what would happen to human society? First, there would be much less climate denial. When you're integrated with weather, you notice changes. You feel them in your body. You see patterns shifting. Climate change isn't an abstract concept. It's something you're experiencing directly through your own nervous system. Humans integrated with weather would naturally care about climate because they'd be feeling its disruption immediately. Second, there would be different architecture. Buildings with windows wouldn't be an afterthought. They'd be central. Weather exposure would be designed into living spaces. Work would happen near windows, or, increasingly, outdoors. The entire built environment would shift to support human weather integration instead of preventing it. Third, there would be different seasonal rhythms. People would slow down in winter, move faster in spring, socialize more in fall. Society would flow with weather patterns instead of trying to maintain consistent speed year. And spiritually. If weather integration produced enlightenment, like stethigo dissolution, cosmic consciousness, the sense of unity with all things, then spirituality would become natural, common, accessible. You wouldn't need to join a religion or travel to an ashram. You'd just need to spend time in weather. Enlightenment wouldn't be rare. It would be normal, and that would fundamentally shift human consciousness at scale. Humans with direct experience of unity consciousness, with direct experience that they're not separate from the universe, with direct experience of their own nature as vast and interconnected, these humans would behave completely differently. They'd be less anxious about death because the boundary between life and death would become less solid. They'd be more compassionate because the boundary between self and other would become less solid. They'd be more humble because they'd recognize that what they call self is just a localized expression of something much vaster. Here's something crucial that ties everything together. An environmentally conscious, spiritually integrated, weather-attuned human population would naturally move toward environmental healing, not out of guilt or obligation, but out of self-preservation because they'd recognize that they are the environment. Healing the planet would be healing themselves. Protecting forests wouldn't be a sacrifice. It would be protecting their own lungs, their own consciousness, their own being. And this shift from seeing environmental protection as opposing human interests to seeing it as aligned with human interests, this is the shift that could make environmental healing actually possible at scale. Because guilt-based environmentalism doesn't work long-term. But love-based environmentalism, the kind that emerges when you recognize yourself as inseparable from nature, that actually works. So here's the vision that ties together everything we've explored. Imagine a future where many humans have committed to daily weather integration, where children grow up with weather consciousness built into their nervous systems from the start, where cities are designed with weather integration in mind, where spirituality and environmental consciousness are the same thing, where humans sleep better, think clearer, feel more integrated, and experience more freedom because they've remembered that they're not separate from the world. This isn't utopia. Challenges would remain, but the consciousness would be different. The fundamental relationship to existence would be healed. And here's what this means for you. Personally, you're being given access to something that humans knew instinctively for millions of years, and only recently forgot. The knowledge that weather is consciousness, that weather integration produces peace, clarity, freedom, that sleep is the natural state when consciousness aligns with environment, that enlightenment might be as simple as rain on your face. This isn't New Age speculation. It's grounded in neuroscience, in chronobiology, in consciousness research, in thousands of years of human experience, and it's available to you right now. You don't have to wait for society to change. You don't have to wait for the perfect conditions. You can start right now. With the next window you look out of, with the next time you feel wind or rain, you can begin the integration. You can start remembering. But here's what I want to suggest. The most powerful moment in this entire 210-minute conversation isn't coming up in the next few minutes. The most powerful moment is going to be in your life when you're outside, experiencing weather consciously, and something shifts. When the boundary between you and the weather becomes unclear. When you feel the rain not as something external but as something happening through you. When you realize that the consciousness you're using to observe the weather is actually made of the same elements as the weather, that's the moment that will change everything. That moment isn't in a video. That moment is in your direct experience. And all of this, all 210 minutes, has been pointing toward you having that moment. So here's my final ask. When that moment comes, and if you practice, it will come. I want to hear about it. Comment below and tell me about the moment when weather stopped being external and became integrated. Tell me about the moment when you felt your consciousness extending into the atmosphere. Tell me about the moment when you understood, not just intellectually, but viscerally, that you are weather. Because those moments, those direct experiences, those are the data that actually matters. That's the evidence that this isn't theory, it's reality. And those stories, your stories there, what will transform this conversation from an intellectual exploration into a lived movement of humans, remembering what they always were. In these final 12 minutes, we've taken everything we've learned across 10 sections of science and philosophy, across practices and possibilities, and we've woven it into a vision of humans integrated with weather, a vision of enlightenment accessed through rain, a vision of environmental healing emerging from self, a vision of society organized around human-environment integration instead of human-environment dominance. This vision isn't guaranteed. It requires choice. It requires humans, individually and collectively, deciding that weather matters, that consciousness matters, that the integration of human awareness with environmental pattern matters. But here's what's profound. This choice is available right now to you. You can be the first person in your family, your community, your generation to consciously commit to weather integration. You can be the beginning of something much larger. You can sleep better, think clearer, feel freer, and simultaneously participate in a transformation that has the potential to heal both human consciousness and the planet. As you finish listening to this, whether you're about to fall asleep or you're still awake, notice the weather where you are. Notice the temperature. Notice the light. Notice any wind. Notice the humidity. You don't have to do anything. Just notice it. Because that noticing, that small act of consciousness directed toward the weather, is the entire practice. That's where transformation begins. That's where you remember what you've always been. Thank you for taking this 210-minute journey with me. Thank you for traveling from weather helps you sleep to weather is consciousness itself. Thank you for being open to the possibility that enlightenment might be weather-mediated, that environmental healing and spiritual awakening might be the same process, that you might be fundamentally integrated with the universe in ways that modern life has helped you forget, but that are always available to remember. Sleep well. Dream vividly. May your next time in rain be a remembering. And when you wake, may you be someone who understands at the deepest level that you are made of weather and weather is made of you. Thank you. See you next week.